Call me, D.
Now for the sake of this story, we're gonna call this guy Gunner. Gunner is 6 months into a 7-year bid for attempted armed robbery, breaking and entering, and probation violation, doing his time in a high max state prison. He was also a part of a well-known blood gang, but he wouldn't become affiliated until he actually got into prison. 1 year in, he met back up with a guy that we'll call Max, a childhood friend he knew since elementary school. They damn near lived the same life with the same struggle in their background. But Max, he caught action way earlier than Gunner, catching his first body at the age of 13. So after doing juvie life, getting out of jail, Gunner has yet to have any charges on his record, and he ends up teaching him how to drive for that full 7 months that he was out in that free world. But he wasn't out long enough to take a proper shit before he was back in handcuffs on weapons possession charges. The case was a bit iffy, with the gun not actually being on his person, but inside a duffel bag on the floor in the back seat. He was driving Gunner's girlfriend's car, who was at work at the time, but he decided to let him drive anyway, to go meet up with this neighborhood thought that he had set him up with. And Max was thinking, look, hey, if I get stopped, it'll just be a driving without a license charge. But Max didn't know he had a fresh bid waiting inside that whip with him, because Gunner forgot it was in there. He got wasted the night before with the same bop that Max was on his way to go see now. He had the strap in the duffel bag because he planned to sell it that day, but the guy ended up backing out. So after picking up the girl, he totally forgot about it. Now just imagine being an 18-year-old young man who never had sex, and Max was determined to pop his cherry that day. But it was cut short when a cop noticed him speeding past him on a back street. Knowing running would just make this whole thing worse, he pulls over, not expecting much but a overnight jail visit in the county, but he would be terribly wrong. It wouldn't take long for the cop to find the gun, having all the probable cause in the world for a goddamn search. Fresh out of juvie, speeding, no driver's license, this stop was tailor-made for a fucking jail visit. Gunner would hear about it and would try to take credit for the gun, but Max wouldn't let him, feeling like his friend wasn't built for where he was about to go. So charging Max, they only gave him 5 years, so he figured he'd be out in half that if he fly straight. Not routed at all, being that he just spent 5.5 years in a similar environment. So afterwards, Gunner did everything he could to keep money on Max's books. With Max not having any family other than his grandmother, Gunner was all he had, and he refused to put his grandmother through the pain of knowing he was arrested again. So on top of Gunner, who already felt guilty as hell, he also loved that dude like a real brother. He would begin robbing folk to keep Max comfortable and to also feed himself and his girl, who was now pregnant. So with the weight this heavy on his shoulders, he took any chance that he could to get some money. Jack and dice games, finessing drug dealers with fake pills, but it would be his first armed robbery that took him down. With no real plan or a solid squad of guys behind him, it was over before it even started. Now one of his guys gave him bad intel on a lone store clerk who counted his drawers every night at the same time. But because he only did a few hours worth of homework on this lick, they would end up attempting to rob a cop's son, who picked him up every night after work in an unmarked car. If he had just waited a day or two to scope out the situation, he would notice, because that same night of the robbery, the clerk's dad came to pick him up, still dressed in his uniform. The cop caught the guys creeping into the alley to kick the back door in, so he called his son to come to the front door ASAP, told him to get in the car while he called for backup. So Gunner and his mans finally kicked through the door after the third try, seeing all the money from today's sales spread out on the table, feeling like they done struck gold, and no one thought about the clerk not being present. And maybe they would have gotten away with it if they did. Now the cop locked the front door behind him, so it's only one way out of here. He waited by the back door until his backup arrived. The alley, congested from both entry points. Gunner runs out first, dropping his gun accidentally, which probably saved his life. His mans, being a few feet behind him, he tried to wave for him to stop, shouting, "Drop the gun, bro, we caught." And that trip to the city jail would be the worst feeling ever. So ironically, both would end up in the very same prison because they were looking out for one another. Poetic, but sad as fuck at the same time. Max made an effort to transfer to the same pod as Gunner, wanting to keep him close. But surprisingly, he held his own. And after a month or so, they would eventually find their way into the same pod together. And a year later, they were now bunkmates and would be approached by a gang member they knew from the street. And they wasn't as close as these two were, but they knew him well enough to carry on conversations here and there. So soon after, off the word of Los, they were inducted into the gang, taking a beat down one by one. They learned the rules, they put in the work, and they started climbing the ranks, which gave them more reach inside the prison. And Max, he would start a relationship with a female CEO, finally popping his cherry. It became more than sex for him, and he fell in love with her, not knowing she was also having sex with a Crip member named Sea-Dog inside the same goddamn pod. And the only way that this worked for her, the Crip member, he knew about it, and he was okay with it. He didn't mind that she was smashing him too. As long as he got his rocks off whenever he wanted to, he can care less. Gunner, he was more chill, reading books, working out, drawing. Got so good at it, he became the dorm's new tattoo man. And then with that, he talked to a lot of people on a daily. And that was the moment he learned about Sea-Dog smashing the CEO. Also, when he was told, he acted surprised to not raise suspicion, so the next day he brung the news to Max, thinking he'll get a little laugh out of it, Definitely a different reaction than the one that he got, which was anger and jealousy. On the spot, he asked where the Sea-Dog was, and Gunner tried his best to stop him, but Max, now weighing in at 230, putting on muscle since a preteen, he couldn't do nothing with him, even if he wanted to. He caught Sea-Dog going to the showers and made his way behind him. Now Gunner, he watched for any security that might be close by, because no members ever showered alone. But this was during child call, and 90% of the people housed here were out of the pod. So Sea-Dog being alone was perfect timing. Max pressed him hard, but he only got laughed at. Sea-Dog telling him, "She for everybody, man. Chill out." And to let it go. But you gotta think, this is the first and only girl he's ever went this far with. So those jealousy stages he would have normally gone through in the free world were non-existent here. Max lashed out, getting into a huge fight. Gunner comes down and breaks them apart, giving Max a look of disappointment. Not noticing Sea-Dog, who left the shower, Gunner tried to check Max, knowing this would stir up bullshit in the pod that's been peaceful since they've been housed together. Sea-Dog runs back in, candy bar in hand, moving towards Max. But because Gunner got his back turned, he don't see this. So looking out for one another as they always did, Max pushed Gunner to the side, but in doing that, it wasn't enough time to protect himself and got stabbed in the gut. By this time, the rest of the pod were already returning, both sides rushing into the shower, pulling them apart, while Gunner runs out to find the CEO, and he runs into the guard, who this whole thing was over. Fearing his brother would die, he didn't even make it about her right then and there. Just said that his brother was stabbed and needed medical attention. And only after removing herself, she calls for help. And Max eventually made it to medical to get stitched up. Sea-Dog would be sent to the hold, not having any time to clean up or hide the evidence. So before anybody can get an idea of what happened, COs locked down the pod. During weeks of lockdown, rumors spread it. Gunner tried to tell the rest of the gang it wasn't gang related, but it didn't make it any better that it was over a piece of ass, and he knew Max had a violation coming. But it's other guys that still feel like, hey, Max tried to throw down. He ain't used no weapon, so they should retaliate just off the strength that he came back in with one. But then it's another side of him saying, nah, he was wrong from the get-go for approaching him about a bitch and not clearing that shit with the top dog first. Both Max and Sea-Dog was released back into the pod during the time that they were still on lock, and both members confirmed what Gunner said. Kites was sent, agreements was made. So in order to keep the peace in this pod and not interrupt any business on both sides, they agreed to a head-up one-on-one between Max and Sea-Dog. But there was one person among the Crip gang who felt different about it. So a day later, after they come off lockdown, they orchestrate a time and place to fight. Now they picked a neutral cell that both sides had no affiliation with, which was this country white boy named Chicken. And the two go in and start moving furniture. Now in the midst of the fight, the member who had his own intentions jumped in, stabs Max to death, only hitting him in the head and the face area, which kick-started an all-out war between the Bloods and the Crips. Things got so out of hand, the female guard who both members were having sex with didn't have enough time to make it out the pod. And Gunner, seeing his brother laid out like that, he decided to take her life, catching her before she can get out the door in full camera view. stabbing her 4 times. They'll call in the SWAT, dogs released, but this relentless war was so savage even the dog was stabbed to death. Let me stop the story. Yes, y'all, this is not an add-in or for entertainment purposes. These motherfuckers stabbed the dog to death. Back to the story. Now comes in more backup. A lot of the gang members tiring out. A lot of people in critical. They eventually get everything under control. Max, he would end up passing away. The female guard he fell in love with would pass away. And Sea-Dog was kept in critical condition for at least 2 months, never breathing the same again. The guards held a small funeral for the dog, and Gunner, who was caught on camera stabbing the CO, got a life sentence on his 7-year bid for looking out for his brother one last time.
Hustler talk, no comment though, just paper chase. Chasing my dreams, my nightmares, ain't got no money, just a cardboard sign and they existing so bum it.